Project ScaleUp. Thank you for indulging me with this interview. I will let you introduce yourself. Let's get right to it.
Well, hello. Good to be here. I appreciate the time. My name is Kyle Guinness. I'm the CEO and founder of Revitalize Energy, and we're developing an energizing eye drop to treat screen fatigue. We're going to be launching later this month.
So, Kyle, we've known each other for about, is it 3 years now since 2020? Probably.
Because Ascender's boot camp was right, like almost exactly 3 years ago.
For the audience who don't know, Ascender is a Pittsburgh-based economic development organization. I am a business consultant there, or Project ScaleUp is my company, and I am the business consultant slash business coach. And we coach businesses from the idea stage, and we coach any type of business, small business, startups, and that's how Kyle and I met. And so, when you started this journey, you were fresh out of school.
Yes, I was.
You were very young. And so a lot of entrepreneurs, they have some work experience and whatnot. How did you find the will and the motivation to carry on with this business for like 3 years now with barely any funding to begin with early in your journey and too many unknowns on the product side with barely any funding for most of those 3 years? How do you go about that? Most people would have given up, found a job, not seeing any returns for 3 long years. What prompted you to keep going?
Well, I think it was a couple things. For starters, I did have to get a job for a year. Revitalize was still my main focus, but I did end up working full-time for a year because, to your point, we ran out of money. I think what made it easier was I was young. I didn't have a lot of expenses. I knew I could take a pretty substantial financial risk and have time to recover if, God forbid, something happens. And I also think I didn't quite understand the scope of what we were trying to do. I was always under the impression that we were 6 months away from product in the market. And I think I maintained that impression for the first 2.5 years. And I do think that if I had known the scale, they say ignorance is bliss. I think if I had known the scale of what we were trying to do, I would have taken a completely different strategy to going about it. But I guess that's a long way of saying the way I managed was ignorance and eventually having to get a job. And then the only way I was able to transition back to Revitalize full time is when we got that additional chunk of funding.
Did you think at the time, because you were still in school when you started the company, did you think that age worked to your advantage, or was it a disadvantage? Or did that change at different stages of the business?
So yeah, I think it very clearly went from an advantage to a disadvantage almost overnight. When you're a student and you're really into entrepreneurship and you're halfway decent at talking, people will give you the time of day. The amount of doors that opened to me just because in the Pittsburgh ecosystem, I was able to say, hey, I'm a Pitt student. I'm really interested in entrepreneurship. I've gone through the Big Idea Center, looking to get some insight. I think I want to start a business when I graduate. People love that. When you're 6 months to a year out of graduation, it gets really old really quick because at that point, you're not old enough to have any meaningful experience and you're too old to really lean on your college institution. And that's when it became a major disadvantage. I think in general, post-college, age, if you're young, is a major disadvantage because people love talking about young entrepreneurship. It's sexy when it's like in the news. It's fun. Like there's all these stories of 30 under 30s and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, investors hate writing checks to young entrepreneurs because who in their right mind would want to write a high 5, low 6-figure check to a 22, 23-year-old with zero work experience? That's a ridiculous proposition. And I think looking back at a lot of the investment conversations we had, it took multiple conversations over multiple years for them to feel comfortable eventually pulling the trigger.
You basically had to reassure them that you're not a fly by night, that you knew what you were doing with your life, with your business.
And I think it took, back when I was first talking to investors, and part of this was complete ignorance, was I would talk about what it was we were doing, and I wouldn't talk about how hard things were going to be. I always framed the conversation as we're super confident, and that's not a bad thing, but we're super confident we're 6 months away. Like we've done all this cool stuff. And really, I didn't start making serious investor traction until I started realizing the severity of taking a product like this to market and like all the necessary things you have to go through. And when I started acknowledging that, the investment conversations were much, much more fruitful, because at that point, the investors were able to go, okay, he no longer doesn't know what he doesn't know. He now knows what he doesn't know. And he knows where he's going to need help. Because investors are pretty good in the most case, they're pretty good at sniffing out not bullcrap, but when somebody doesn't understand how hard taking a product to market or building a company is.
That's a good point, because in my role as a business consultant, right, I say to entrepreneurs that you have to have integrity, because investors know when you're overselling. And sometimes that doesn't really land especially for first-time entrepreneurs. And your case is a very good example of somebody who's transparent, who tells it like it is, and gains the trust and eventually funding from these investors, right? So I'm glad you shared that, because for someone like me who observes all these entrepreneurs over the years and tries to make that message at a high level, it doesn't always land, and you provide that concrete example. So I'm hopeful that, that's a learning example for viewers who are presenting for the first time, or feel like they have to have all the answers, or feel like they have to be super confident and can't get off guard, and they can't say, I don't know.
And it's to your point, it is a balancing act. I guess you need to be confident in that when an investor presses you, the I don't know, but this is counterintuitive. And I don't know can't come from a place of ignorance. It has to come from a place of understanding, which I think is super counterintuitive. I came from the sales world, and even the best sales reps were oftentimes the people who would say, I don't know, to a client, because
I don't know because, but this is what I've tried, and this is what I do know doesn't work. Things very informed, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Because in order for you to understand what it is you don't know, you actually have to figure out quite a bit. For I mean, you can attest to this. For this type of product, there was so much that we didn't know. We were unaware of where our ignorance truly was. And I think that was where a lot of investors were uncomfortable.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing that. Speaking of, so there's 2 points that you brought up, the raising funding part and the severity. So if I can shift the question to the severity piece that you brought up, it was the severity of the just the unknowns and the risks in the business. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What does that mean when you mentioned the severity of that? It was part ignorance and then part severity of just the things that had to be figured out.
Yeah, I think maybe intensity or magnitude is a better word, but I mainly meant understanding how difficult what we were trying to do was, especially when the founder, myself, didn't come from that industry at all. Because I didn't come from any industry, because I got out of school. And I wasn't even a technical student. Like I wasn't a student in optometry or ophthalmology or analytical chemistry, like any of that. I was a marketing student. So I didn't understand what it took to develop a drug product, to reformulate a drug product, to navigate the FDA with a drug product, to find a manufacturer that's registered with the FDA for a drug product, to handle negotiations and relations with that manufacturer for a drug product. And when you add all of that under the intensity of the costs associated with these types of products, I had no idea it was going to take the amount of money, time, investment, both intellectually and in terms of capital. I had no idea. And I didn't start to really digest that for quite a while. And when I did is when we started having success raising capital and really hitting our milestones, because once we understood what that was going to look like, it was very easy for us to communicate, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Investor, this is where your money is going to go. This is how far it's going to take us. And it took us going through that process multiple times with smaller amounts of money for the larger chunks to start flowing in.
to close out the fundraising and age question,
Mhm.
was part of your solution for that to bring on people who were older than you to the team? Because when I look at your pitch deck, for example, you brought me on as CFO later, and you brought on Jim Mosbo, the science officer, who has decades and decades of experience, who's an expert and pretty well known in the formulation for optometrics. Ophthalmics field. Was that part of the strategy once you realized that, okay, age is starting to work as a disadvantage?
It definitely was. And believe it or not, our first angel investor gave me that piece of advice because he took a shot before, Tammy, before I'd even brought you on. And he was the one who recommended, after I talked to him about you, he also recommended, hey, she sounds like a slam dunk. But it was the way he framed it. I'll never forget it. He basically said, Kyle, you need to add some gray hair to your team, because from an investment perspective,
gray yet,
I need.
but
Thankfully, Jim's got it. He's a great guy.
Jim makes up for it.
Yeah. But he brought up, when I look at your team, I need to make sure that there's accredited people in the industry there who would know if what you're trying to do is possible. So take your situation, for example. You have the financial experience to know, hey, is your business model with your COGS, your estimated customer acquisition cost, your price point, and as a direct-to-consumer product, is it scalable, is it profitable? Jim is the type of person who knows, okay, is what you're trying to do under this regulatory body with this budget, is that possible? And when you combine those things, it goes a very long way in alleviating a lot of the rejections that would come from investors. When I can say, like, no, as a founding team, we have 4 decades of experience. And granted, my experience is 1/2 of one of those decades, but still it's that goes a much longer way in helping investors feel more comfortable. And that was pretty critical to us. For our chief science officer, I couldn't bring on an analytical chemistry master student who maybe could have made it work, who maybe had the lab facilities to make it work. But for what we were trying to do and what we needed
real world experience.
Yeah, we needed real world industry experience and a proven track record of taking other products to market, things like that.
The investors that you've brought on as well, that also now act as advisors, are also nearing retirement age. I suppose that's also part of the strategy. That shows a lot of self-awareness and self-realization on your part. And that's not always the case, even with, entrepreneurs who have 10, 15 years on you. What would you say was a turning point in your journey to self-awareness and realization? When are the times when you said, I can't do this alone, equity is worth less than people who can help me increase the value of this company? Aside from somebody like an advisor or an investor telling you need some gray hairs, were there any other turning points?
It's a good question. I think it really took a year of slamming my head against the wall in terms of getting the funds necessary to go through this type of products development process, because I had too much confidence when I was still in school, because all my professors were like, this is a cool idea. This is because obviously a good professor is not going to stomp out a wide-eyed student that wants to try something.
Everyone was a cheerleader.
I was able to get very far with professors recommending me to other professors who could do things. Like my senior year, we had help even on the chemistry side of things. It was huge. Free help, that's great. But I think, and in terms of the people we were pitching against, we had a very well-crafted pitch, and that took us really, really far, because I'm a fairly good presenter. My co-founder at the time, who I was working with, was also a very good presenter. So we leveraged the heck out of that and got very, very far. The problem was post-graduation, when you got a couple months of getting your butt kicked, I realized, okay, there are people who I feel as though I'm better at in terms of presenting, who are getting way farther than me. They're doing more with less. They are forming more meaningful connections. They're becoming parts of programs that are more prestigious and programs that I want to get to. They're already taking steps to get into market. And these are people who, when I'm looking at it at a surface level, pitch for pitch, I think ours is better. And maybe our rubric said our pitch was better, but they're still moving further along than we are. And it took that self-reflection of, oh, there is something I am fundamentally missing, because pitch competitions are not a good evaluation for the strength of a company. And it took a while for me to accept that, because in large part, I didn't want to, because pitching was the one thing I was decent at. And when you realize the one thing that you're decent at isn't enough to get you over the hump, that's a humbling thing, because then you have to go, oh crap, I need to find actual qualified people that can help me. Because right now I'm going to keep spinning my wheels for another 6 months. We're going to run out of money. We're going to run out of momentum, and this idea is going to be dead. So
you had to go back and work on the substance, essentially.
Yeah. And that was hard to do because I didn't know anything about that. Anything. I'd present our, and you can talk
and you
about,
and I are kind of polar opposites in that manner, because I'm all about substance.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons we work really well together, because I'll put together the pitch and you'll be like, Kyle, we need more for you to talk about this. Like, we need more information. And I think like what I would do was I'd always, like, when I was presenting, and I think I did this in the Ascender pitch, to get on, I'd talk about the strategy, the concept, the use case, and it all makes sense. It's an easy product to understand. And whenever it came to the formula, the most important part, I would just be like, yeah, we're working with industry experts to finalize our formulation. And that was good enough until it wasn't. And that's when we had to take a step back.
I remember one time when, when we have one of these pitch presentations, and it's you and maybe 9 other companies, right? And sometimes there was one company that would outshine everybody else because they were so good at pitching. And I remember my reaction would be like, that sucked, and everybody else is clapping, because I would be like, why are you clapping? There's no substance in it. And I would go to bat for you, because that's finally when you started putting in all the substance. But then because you focus so much on the substance, you didn't rehearse the pitch as much. But I'm like, but he has this, and that.
And it's like there's never enough. It's like it's never good enough. And I think what's difficult is the more substance you have, sometimes the harder the pitch can be. And that's counterintuitive, but it's easy for me. I'll give you a prime example. It's easy for me to talk about estimated conversion rates based on a very small ad set that we did when we were pre-launch for our traction slide versus our real conversion rate when we're actually selling product. Those are two worlds apart. So I can easily talk about the fact that we had, for our lead generation campaign, we had a 50% click-through rate and a 25% conversion rate for getting email addresses. Yeah, that's not the same as getting product sales online, but it's easy for me to talk about and throw around these really big numbers that make people feel at ease. But to your point, okay, well, what's the actual substance behind that?
It was simpler messaging and simpler to understand. And then once you get into the data and try to express how that came about, and it's not as shiny as your former messaging, suddenly people don't like it, right? But it's real data. And so anyway, let's get into your product a little bit. How do you ensure that your product is differentiated or your service is differentiated from competitors?
So for us, differentiation comes from 2 different sides. One is the product side. So in our product are 2 compounds that interact with what's called the focus adjustment mechanism of the eye, that based on some research that came out of SUNY's Department of Optometry are the most prevalent cause of digital eye fatigue. That is really powerful stuff. We lean on that quite a bit. Is that enough to sell the product the way we want to sell it? Maybe. But the other important thing is something like packaging, our messaging, our distribution channel. So this is our packaging. It's very, very different from, I'm trying to come up with, I don't think I have one in front of me, but it's very different from the other types of eye drop brands that you would see on a store shelf. Another area we want to be different is we don't want to be on the same store shelves as them. We want to be on different store shelves if we're in stores, but we mainly want to exist online. Because what we've seen is some very successful consumer packaged good brands enter the space that was previously dominated by big guys. If you look at the toothpaste industry, the razor industry, hair products, cosmetics products. And they're able to very effectively carve out large market share with the direct-to-consumer distribution channel. If you look at like Native Deodorant, for example, they entered the deodorant space that was dominated by Procter & Gamble. Or it might be Unilever, I'm not 100% sure, but either way. And they came in and with 3 to 6 product SKUs were able to scale to massive, massive amounts via direct to consumer because they were in a different spot. And I think those are the 2 categories of differentiation. We have very strict science-based product differentiation, but we also have messaging, branding, and distribution differentiation.
When I look at native in the classic sense of IP and protectability, right, it doesn't seem easily defensible. How would you characterize the defensibility of Revitalize?
I would say purely in terms of IP for the formulation, the IP, I would call it moderately strong. I'll explain a little bit of how we did things. What we did is our differentiators are in the inactive ingredient category. And what that means is we don't have to do new types of clinical trials to make the claims we make associated with it because there was already research about safety and efficacy. So we just lean on that. And what we did is we patented those compounds up to a certain range in concentration. And if a competitor wants to use those same compounds, okay, well, they are going to have a concentration high enough to where it's an active ingredient. And then they have to do that type of that in-depth clinical research. And that takes a very long time. So that's a fairly strong intellectual property strategy. Where we're weaker is there's nothing that's stopping the big guys from putting their products online and experimenting with other types of quote unquote eye fatigue treatments that may or may not have the type of research backing that ours does and calling it something similar and putting their ads right next to our ads. There's nothing stopping them from doing that.
But it would all be mostly marketing because it wouldn't
but
be.
Yeah, they wouldn't have the literature base that we do. But you can make literature bases go away with a big enough marketing budget. So at that point when we think about that, they're doing so good in store shelves, they're crushing it in store shelves. Like eye drops as an industry has exploded specifically over the past 5 years, partly because of the pandemic. Would they allocate significant resources to try to stamp out our brand as opposed to, from the perspective of Visine from Johnson & Johnson, allocating more dollars to compete against somebody like Bausch & Lomb who can go punch for punch with them? We don't really think so. And that's where, because we're also targeting different consumers than who they typically go after, we view ourselves as we can capture significant market share. And if it gets to the point where they have the option to go head with us versus cutting us a check for an acquisition, they'd lean more towards the acquisition side of things. Now, only time will tell if that's the direction that things go. But we've seen plenty of examples of this. Native, for example, had less of an intellectual property angle than we do. And my understanding is, I could be wrong.
They're still there and it has expanded.
Yeah, and they were acquired at $100 million. So that we see constant examples of this. Look at something like Dollar Shave Club. They were acquired for $1 billion. They didn't have any intellectual property on their specific razors or anything. And if they did, Gillette could have had a prototype out in 2 weeks, but
right.
Those big guys, that's not what they do, but they're happy to write a check for something like that because for them, they're adding to their already existing product portfolio. So that's the angle that we try to take.
How long do you think a new drug product development, basically the question I'm asking is, how long does Revitalize Energy have? Should a competitor try to go above the inactive ingredient threshold and actually do a new product development? Are we talking 3 years, 5 years? How long does that whole process take? Basically, how much time do you have for an acquisition to happen?
It's a good question. If they tried to use our compounds and tried to make something very similar but with higher concentrations, with the research that they would need to do, it's probably like a 3 to 5 year timeline. I could be wrong on that, but with the existing literature base, with the FDA consultants I've spoken with, you're looking at about 3 to 5 years minimum. They might be able to expedite that because they can dump tons of money into it. But once again, at that point, would you dump money into that or would you purchase what we're doing? But 3 to 5 years seems like a fairly good estimate. Even if they wanted to go the other route of maybe using different compounds, things like that, that's still a year to a year and a half, because you still need to register with the FDA if it's a new product. You still need to do your stability testing, which is 3 months at minimum. You still need to do your irritation testing, which can be 1 to 2 months. Like you still have to do all of these different things. You need to create compliant packaging. Like it's not easy. You need to get your NDC listing, which is your registration, approved by the FDA. That can take a long time. So there's still a lot that they have to do. So we're fairly confident when we get on their radar, when we're big enough to get on their radar, we still have a fairly good buffer to really put our foots on the gas to look like that much better of an acquisition target.
And I imagine for companies that big of a behemoth, the decision-making process alone with leadership is a year. They just move so slow. So that's another buffer. Very quick question. What do you consider is the biggest risk facing the business?
We're looking at protecting the terminology energizing eye drops, and we're looking to build a case for if you don't have a stimulant, you can't say something like energizing eye drop because there's not actually anything energizing in there, but we don't know what that's going to look like. So if a competitor really wanted to screw with us, they could take an existing formulation they have, call it energizing, and triple, quadruple, quintuple our ad spend just to drown us out. Would their product be as effective? No. Would their product actually be energizing? No. But if they have deep pockets, which a lot of these big guys do, that's something they can do. We need to be prepared for that. So I'd say that's probably the biggest risk at this point.
So they can squeeze Revitalize out in terms of marketing budget.
Yeah. They can spend 5, 10, 15x what we're spending because they have very deep pockets. Would they? I don't know.
What advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs looking to start their own business?
I get this question a lot. What is the old adage? The best time to start is yesterday. The next best time to start is today. I really think that's an oldie but a goodie, just because there's never a good time. You can never plan for something like that. It's best to just start. It's going to cost way more, take way more time, and be way more difficult than you're thinking, even in your worst case scenario. So just start, because it's going to take you a while. And try to have fun with it and roll with the punches, because take your worst case scenario, multiply it by 15, and that's probably what your everyday might look like. So be prepared and have fun with it, because you need to be able to handle what happens.
An example of that would be, tell us a story that you've encountered that had a very low probability of happening, and it happened anyway, because this is the sort of thing that happens with entrepreneurs that's more common than you think if you were an entrepreneur. That doesn't happen in everyday life. Can you tell us that story about your lab batch that was lost? And yeah, I'll let you tell the story.
So we were sending out our first batch of samples. We had partnered with 50 content creators, and we needed a lab batch of samples made like this, that still had safety seals, still had all of our FDA compliant packaging. We needed that, and we needed it from our manufacturer. So my manufacturer, thankfully, they rush order a batch of 75. I need them overnighted to my house because I'm in Chicago for another program. So I need to get them, ship them out immediately so the influencers can get them and start creating content for us. The first package, USPS loses. We paid to get it overnighted. It gets lost. The response I get is that it's somewhere from our manufacturer to the St. Louis airport. They can't tell me where. They can't tell me who has it. I went to our local post office, and I talked with like 5 people. And I would not leave until they had answers for me, and they didn't. Keep in mind, every lab batch of product costs us $1,200 because our manufacturer needs to turn off the fill line for what they're making, turn it on for us. Everything still needs to be sterile. They need to do all the raw material tests. Like that's all still needs to happen. So package gets lost. Oh crap. We have content creators waiting for product. Our manufacturer goes back, makes another 50 samples for us. We get charged for the rush order. That gets shipped to us. We get it. We send it out. Okay. Next thing you know, the package gets found from the USPS. It arrives at my front door on a Monday. By the time I get back, the package has been stolen off of my front porch. Like, you can't make this crap up. Like, it's ridiculous. And that type of crap is the little things that you don't think about that just always pop up, like always pop up. We had to reformulate at one point, and Tammy, I was telling you about this. We had to reformulate because one of the raw materials that we needed, the most common place to get it was Ukraine, and it was very, very difficult to source it. And it was easier at that point to just reformulate and create a new product with a better supply chain. Like we originally had these super cool bottles that we wanted to use from a manufacturer in China. And when we were reaching final negotiations with them, China shut down for their COVID zero policy. And we were talking to them. They're like, we can't tell you when we're going to open up. We don't know. And we can't delay from our perspective. We can't delay our product launch because we may or may not get a cool bottle. We got to get product out there. So we had to switch to these. Like that type of stuff just happens and you have to roll with it. Deadlines are missed. A supplier doesn't work. Somebody ghosts you, an investor who you thought you were definitely going to get says no. For lack of a better word, shit just happens and you have to be prepared.
Yeah. You have these unpredictable lows. And that's why in the first part of the interview, I asked you, how do you keep going, especially when you are, first time entrepreneur, fresh out of school. Most people would have just, I'm going to go find a job. I'm going to quit and find a job.
Yeah.
Shameless plug. I always ask people for a shameless plug. What do you need right now from the audience or anybody who might be watching and want to support you and your product and the company?
Yeah, I appreciate it. We are really, really close to launch. We've been wading through the storm for quite a while. And our first shipment of product is set to arrive to our facility in the next couple weeks. So we'd really appreciate it if you guys could check out the product. Feel free to order it, give it a try. We're trying to get as much additional feedback as possible. It's available at myrevitalize.com. You can purchase a bottle. You can get a discount if you subscribe and save. We offer bulk purchases. So we'd really appreciate if you'd be willing to purchase a bottle and let us know what you think. All the inbound emails are answered by me. So if you have a piece of feedback, you'll get a response from me.
And is there anyone or any organization that you want to thank?
Geez. Well, special thanks to Project ScaleUp and to you, Tammy, both for your help as a mentor and also for everything you do for the business. Special thanks to Ascender for being the first program we had an opportunity to be a part of at the accelerator level. Thank you, Pitt, specifically Pitt's Innovation Institute. They did a lot for us. Amplify Up out in Utah, they were huge for us. Future Founders Fellowship in Chicago, and right here in Pittsburgh, Alpha Lab Gear and Innovation Works. As you guys can see, it's a lot of programs because we needed a lot of help. And it took very talented people from all of those institutions helping us to get to this point.
Well, thank you, Kyle. That was certainly very informative. And I'm sure whoever's watching will appreciate all of the insights that you've provided to us. And thank you, everyone, for watching. If you have any questions for me or for Kyle, you can reach us so Kyle's email will be kyle@myrevitalize.com. You can reach me at Tammy, that's TAMMY, at Project ScaleUp, all one word, .com. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kyle. Thanks for watching. Yep. Bye.